Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Hope you're having a great day as we barrel toward the 4th of July. It's an exciting time of the year here in coastal Mississippi. A lot of tourists in town. The Mississippi Deep Sea Fishing Rodeo is going on. I have fished in it for over 40 years. It's a lot of fun for me. It's a great reunion. My son Justin comes down from New York. My son Jordan, my brother-in-laws Peter and Mark Bahanovich, and we go out and have a good time. We enjoy doing it. We enjoy contributing to the rodeo and helping, keep that really important part of our heritage here in coastal Mississippi. A lot of stuff's in the news, but one of the reasons why I like my next guest is we get the opportunity to kind of break it all down. So without any further ado, let me welcome my friend Ashley Edwards, the former CEO of the Gulf Coast Business Council. He's an entrepreneur involved in a tremendous number of really, I think, fruitful projects. And then on top of that, he's a contributor to SuperTalk Mississippi News. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Ricky. Thanks for having me this morning. Good to see you.
So you kind of got dual residence. You have a place on the water over here near me, actually. So we get to enjoy that same sort of beautiful being on Back Bay experience. But on top of that, you're a big Atlanta Braves fan. And because you do a lot of traveling, the Atlanta hub is a good place for you to be. And you actually have a place near the stadium in the Battery area, this wonderful mixed use area in Atlanta. So how are you splitting your time between there and the coast these days?
Well, I was on the coast a lot during the winter and the early part of the spring. And of course, when baseball season starts, it makes a lot of sense to be here when I can, especially when we have big home stands and the Braves are in town. So I'm here a lot during the summertime, but it's nice, the yin and yang, being in the city and then getting to come back to Biloxi and relaxing there on Back Bay. Couldn't live a better life than that if I tried.
I have, when I was in New Orleans, we had a place in the warehouse district. So it's the same kind of thing. And of course, when I was in Alabama, same scenario. And so, it was cool kind of having dual residence. You could kind of get the best of both worlds. So I could be in the warehouse district and enjoy that. And there's always so much to do in the city. And then, of course, I always call this our home base. I was never going to not have my home base. And I was fortunate in my career to be able to have a dual residence scenario. And you are too. So how's business for you guys? You're involved in lots of different stuff these days, aren't you?
It's going really well. We kind of have two sides to our business. We do a lot of work with private developers on private development projects and, work on public finance initiatives and various incentives to try to bring private developments to fruition. And then we have, a big piece of our business is working with governments, usually local governments, county or city governments in a post-disaster environment, very much like what we went through there in coastal Mississippi. And of course, we're doing a lot of work down in Florida. They've just been hammered by so many hurricanes. We still got clients that are working on projects related to Hurricane Michael, which has been, several years ago now, I think 6 years ago now. Of course, the hurricanes that came through late last year, the things that had happened up in North Georgia and North Carolina, which is obviously very close to where I am right now, and starting to get into more of that work as that is starting to really come about. And that's a tough world and getting tougher in some ways because there's so many big changes going on to the federal disaster recovery framework with FEMA and some of the things that the Trump administration is bringing to bear. So everybody is kind of back at square one and trying to see the way that things are going to go now. But I'm very hopeful. It's a world that has needed some reform and needed some evolution, and hopefully this is a good opportunity for some of that to happen.
Yeah, you worked with Phil Bryant, you know him well, and he's on that task force. In fact, we exchanged notes over the weekend, and I think they said they're barreling toward a November date, and they're really, really busy. I mean, they're knee deep in it. So it's not just, a lot of people say, well, this is going to just eliminate FEMA and oh my gosh, it's going to be terrible. It seems like they're taking a very legitimate, putting in place a very legitimate process to try to define the role that states will have going forward. And I mean, he seemed like they were moving in the right direction. But do you have any early insights in any of their work?
No, I really don't have any good visibility on which direction they're moving. I mean, I think in broader general terms, it's clear that they want to establish and define the role that states are going to play, and I think that's a good thing. FEMA really has two things that it does. It's a response and a recovery organization, and you couldn't have two different sides of a coin. If you really think about it, response, the immediate aftermath to a disaster, is so much different than the long-term provision of financing and project construction and things that drag out. If anybody's driving through East Biloxi today, they'll see streets that are all torn up, and those are still FEMA projects from Hurricane Katrina 20 years ago. So those things stretch out for a long time, and faces change. Different parts of FEMA handle different things, and sometimes having the states more established in those roles, allowing them to lead, allowing them to have, more of a lead role could be a very good thing for local recovery. Because what we deal with every day are not the triumphant stories necessarily, but the red tape, the bureaucracy, the difficulty in just moving things along, and frankly, the waste that gets born into the equation as a result of that. And so anything that can be done to protect the provision of aid and get it to the locals who need it more quickly and more efficiently is an improvement.
I agree. And you do a lot of work in Gulf Coast states, so especially Florida, for example, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago. And Florida is a very capable place. It's a very capable state, but they're not alone. One of the things I said to Phil Bryant when we were exchanging notes, that when you think about FEMA, you tend to think about areas that are hit by hurricanes or maybe the wildfires, for example, and those kinds of things. But what you don't realize is that virtually every county in the entire United States has had some form of federal disaster declaration of some sort. So, and so what that means is every state's got some experience with this. Certainly more states like Mississippi and Florida and Alabama and Louisiana and Texas have more experience with this for sure, because we've dealt with such broad and destructive storms. But you just hope that the capacity in those other states that don't typically have to deal with this, even though, again, there are federal disaster declarations everywhere, but there's something about doing it over and over again, like you're experiencing in Florida, where you build internal capacity through the Florida management group, and here MEMA and Mississippi and so on, that some states are just better positioned to deal with disasters than others. You agree with that?
I totally agree with that. And it's the dynamic that is so interesting to me. I was doing some work with the state of Montana. They had really major flooding on the Yellowstone River a couple of years ago, and did a lot of damage to small towns along the river, and a lot of businesses and homes destroyed. And so, from their perspective, it's like their version of Hurricane Katrina. They have all of these towns impacted, and water and sewer lines scoured out, and roads gone, and businesses gone, and hospitals that are shut down, and it's widespread. And so, and then you show up to a place like Montana that has never dealt with a tropical system, but what they're dealing with and what they're going through and what they're experiencing is just like what Waveland or Bay St. Louis or Long Beach went through and experienced, because they're dealing with the same federal recovery infrastructure for these big events. And so the commonalities are incredible. And what you often find is, and look, I will say this and argue with anybody that says otherwise. I mean, some of the people I have met within FEMA are the finest public servants I've ever met in government. People that care, they show up, they are really have real ownership of the mission they do. But they're also limited by just the federal bureaucracy and the things that they have to do. And one thing that never changes is that local communities and states care more about their people than anybody else. They care more about their recovery. They're the ones that are looking at their own scorecard of how quickly they're moving, and they're incentivized to get the work done. So, to the extent that they've got a bigger role to play in moving things along, it will be, I think, a net positive if that's the final result, and I think it will be.
Yeah, we were in Montana this year and saw some of the recovery. In fact, I was blown away, and like even in Yellowstone, already rebuilt bridges and so on. I mean, the process really has been moving along wonderfully there.
Yes.
I could say the same thing about certain areas of North Carolina. I mean, the way they went in there and just latched on the infrastructure the way they did. What a great story. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ashley Edwards. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. Hope you're having a great day. We're visiting with Ashley Edwards. I always love to come circle back with him because he's always paying attention to what's happening in the news. And we just like to visit. We did when he was at the Business Council. And since he left, he's contributed to SuperTalk Mississippi News. We just stay in touch. And that has been a real value of keeping the conversations going with Ashley. Hey, listen, I have mentioned this on the show. But if you go to SuperTalk Mississippi News, which is supertalk.fm, or if you have the app, I would really encourage you to download the app. And I say it all the time. It's Mississippi news from Mississippi, and you're not going to find news from Indiana. It's news about Mississippi. And if you're not using that as a news source about what's happening in Mississippi, man, this free service, there's not going to be any rope-a-dope where later you're going to get charged for it or anything like that. There's really a great opportunity here for you to see what's going on in the state, and they don't miss the big stories. I'm telling you. So go to supertalk.fm. But most of us here in coastal Mississippi have had to get our heads around the headline that appeared last week, which is the iconic real estate developer and Biloxi native Joseph Canizero died at 88 years old. And of course, we know him because of what's happened up in northern Harrison County. You think about, the William Carey campus. You think about St. Patrick's High School. You think about all that development in that area. It's quite a story, but his real benefit, his real impact is what he did in the Crescent City. Dating back to, I would say, I think, in fact, it actually has in the story, began in 1966. And his impact to really literally changing the skyline of New Orleans is truly remarkable. Business centers, hotels, mixed-use developments, and so much more. Had a long relationship with Miss Benson, who obviously you know her from, she owns the Saints. I had the opportunity to spend some time with her when I was in New Orleans, but she just sings his praises. I could go on. It's great when you see someone of his, you see a Biloxi native going to do incredible things. And certainly he did that here. We know it, again, through the traditions. I should have said traditions earlier when I was talking. That's continued to evolve. Things like the William Carey campus, for example. Of course, Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College has a growing program there. But William Carey campus may ultimately be their primary campus for William Carey. I believe that the center of gravity is going to start to shift from Hattiesburg down to the coast. But his vision, his understanding that if you bring people together in these campuses, then it's going to sort of create a city effect in a place like Traditions. And that's happening. It takes a long time, but it's happening. He has such great vision. I got a chance to reconnect with him when I went over to be publisher of the Times-Picayune and president of NOLA Media Group, and really began to really appreciate his contributions to the city. But here's a man that was hitting, very significantly in two states over a long period of time. And man, will he leave a really incredible legacy. Anything you want to say, Ashley, before we shift gears?
Well, I echo your sentiments. I got to know Mr. Canizero very well over a lot of years. You know, he was a very good member of the business council during my tenure there. As you can imagine, you know, you have the I smile as I say this, you have the kind of members who are members because they want to support the mission of the organization, but you don't always hear a lot from them. But he was not that kind of guy. He was a guy that never had any hesitation picking up the phone and calling me on my cell phone any time of day or night if he felt like he had something he wanted to talk about. But I tell you the thing, Ricky, that gets me every time I see something in the headlines, whether it's a guy like Mr. Canizero or George Schlogel or my old friend Bobby Chain from Hattiesburg, who's been gone for years now, or even some of those that you know are still with us. You know, people like Jerry St. Pay, these statesmen of a certain generation. And what I learned from them, watching the way they operated, the relational way they went about conducting their business, never transactional, the common decency that they had, and how they interacted with people. You know, Joe Canizero was a guy who had more success in his life than I will ever know. And every time we got on the phone with each other, we're like old buddies talking. You know, he talked to me on that kind of a level. And there's something that we lose when folks who are of a different generation leave us. And you know, just remembering the legacy they had, and the kind of people they were, and what they did that made them as successful as they were. And there's a
Yeah.
lot we can all learn from that.
You said that really well. I mean, he wasn't he is you know he was a big shot, but he didn't act like a big shot. You know,
That's true.
he was full of vision and ideas, and he wanted you to see what he was thinking, and he seemed to have tireless energy. I've told you, I think I mentioned the story to you, and I won't go into the great detail here, but I could tell so many stories about him. But one that really comes to mind: Hurricane Dennis was going to hit New Orleans in 2005. It ended up hitting Florida, but they did a mandatory evacuation of New Orleans. And we had been in touch. Stan Tyner, at the time the executive editor of the Sun Herald, and I had been in touch with Joe. We've had sit downs with him, editorial boards with him. You know what I'm saying, the whole 9 yards. But he said he wanted us to meet. He wanted us to meet Mayor Nagin. And so he literally flew Nagin here in a helicopter, and just to have lunch with me and Stan. And what was interesting is he came in. We were at the Great Southern Club. They arrived. And it was Joe Canizero, and Mayor Nagin, and Stan and me at one of the side rooms at the Great Southern Club. And when he introduced us, Joe says, "I hope y'all have a good meeting." He leaves the room. He didn't tell us he was going to do that. And we said, no, Joe, you don't have to leave. No. I want y'all to have this opportunity, just the three of y'all, to just chat. And for 2 hours, we sat there with Mayor Nagin. That's when Mayor Nagin told me, because I had, Times Picayune had done this big series about concerns about the levees and all of that. And I said to him, because I was a big tropical storm guy even back then. And I said, if you read those series, I'm deeply concerned. I mean, what they're saying about you dodged a bullet with this hurricane, but there could be more. And what they're saying about the heat content of the Gulf of Mexico. Went through that whole thing. And he said, no, I'm not concerned at all. I think we got a great levee system in New Orleans. And 2 weeks later, Hurricane Katrina hits. What are the chances of that? But because Canizero made that meeting happen. that was classic Canizero. And, he goes and picks him up in a helicopter and flies him to us just to have lunch with us. I was amazed by that.
Well, one of the things, whenever I hear his name, the first thing that always pops in my mind, and really the lesson that I think that I took away from my interactions and experiences with him is, he had an optimistic stubbornness And I think it was rooted in his vision, but he never took no for an answer. I mean, I'm the kind
Yeah.
of person that looks at a possibility and starts immediately thinking about all the limitations. And there was nothing, you could not convince him that something couldn't be accomplished. And I think that's one of the reasons he was so successful, because he'd get in a room with folks and have a big grand idea, and then people would start giving him laundry lists of all of the limitations and the downsides, and he just saw all of that as something that could be overcome, to see a
Yeah.
vision realized. And so it's that optimistic stubbornness of this: we can do this, we can make this happen. And there's a lot to be said for that. He was a risk taker. He was someone with an incredible vision, and he was someone that just didn't understand the word no or the word can't.
When you're telling that story, I'm reminded of, and I got a faint memory of it, so I got to try to, maybe you can help me with this, but it was a diabetes institute or something that he was really spending a lot of time thinking about. Yeah, you're shaking your head, yes. I remember,
Yes.
let me tell you why I remember this. The team at NOLA Media Group was working with him and his team to develop a national digital strategy focused on bringing attention to this diabetes cause that he was engaged with. And I never will forget, I mean, the depth of this analysis that they did and the work that they did. And I even remember Richard Diamond, a family member of the Newhouse, is actually personally being involved in that effort. But wow, I mean, just doggedly determined to make something happen.
Well, I mean, it's such a great example, because you think about it, that it's there today at Tradition. It's the National Diabetes and Obesity Research Institute, led by the Cleveland Clinic. And that's a perfect example. We're going to have the Cleveland Clinic putting a National Diabetes and Obesity Research Institute in Biloxi, Mississippi at Tradition. Seems far fetched, but you drive by there today and there it sits. So just incredible.
We were working with him
accomplished
when that was just a dream in his eye. And I just remembered. And now that you tell me, I remember that they actually did open it, but these are all distant memories that are coming back. There's so many others like that I could conjure up. But what a great man, and representing Biloxi so incredibly well, leaves an amazing legacy. That's Joseph Canizero, who died at 88. God bless him and his family. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ashley Edwards. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. We have Ashley Edwards, former CEO of the Gulf Coast Business Council. He's an entrepreneur. He's involved in lots of different stuff these days, and someone I just enjoy spending some time with. I really enjoyed looking back on Joseph Canizero's life and honoring him in that last segment. I hope you enjoyed that too. As we were chatting during the break, there's so many more stories we could tell. He was a guy you couldn't say no to. That was one of the great lessons of Joe Canizero, big dreamer and somebody you couldn't say no to. So look, it's interesting. I've been writing my book, and I am, I've been finished, and I've got an initial sort of read from an editor, and I'm in the process now. It's a brutal process for me for a lot of reasons, but it's just hard, hard landing on words and the whole 9 yards. And I've been writing every morning. Started about 3 or 3:30 every single morning. Have been doing that for a while now, for months, to be quite honest with you. And so, but anyway, it's interesting. I decided at Lent to get off of Facebook, and I stayed off of Facebook. I just stayed off of it. And I think I went back to, what happened was I posted a picture on Instagram, and I forgot that I had it set where it would also post, when I post a picture at Instagram, it would go to Facebook. And, Instagram, I just got my closest family are there, and they'll see photos of, maybe a sunset or whatever. But what happened on Facebook is that Facebook was starting to take a lot of time, man, for me, because of my show. And I would post maybe one of my columns that I wrote, and people would be engaged about it. And I was, the engagement, like the last column that I wrote, 97,000 people engaged. That's how many people got engaged, because it would get shared with someone. And because I was a public figure, I can get the internal, whatever. And that sounds like a lot, but see, the Sun Herald, we would have 300,000 readers, and NOLA.com, we'd have 4.5 million uniques. I mean, it was just crazy, engagement. So I'm not overwhelmed by the numbers that were involved. But the point is, I tried to answer and be engaged, and there's a lot of vitriol and this polarization and all this stuff, man. And when Link got here, I said, what's something that I can give up that I can really benefit from having done that? And I do. I take Lent pretty seriously. And, I changed my diet. I got off Facebook. I do a lot of stuff, but I got off Facebook. And buddy, it's been wonderful. I'll be honest with you, it's been great. So whatever engagement there's going to be, it's going to be on this show. We're still posting to the Ricky Matthews Show at Facebook, but I'm just not there paying attention. And what I find is that if I'm not there paying attention, I'll get a couple of private notes from people, but it's almost like if you die, the lights aren't going to blink and the world's just going to go on. So if you get off Facebook, the world's just going to go on. But when the hurricane season gets here, a couple of people have asked, will I post about that? And I will, probably at the Ricky Matthews page. So if people want to follow my tropical post, then that will probably be at the Ricky Matthews page. But I haven't, there's not been a lot to write about, thank God, as from a tropical point of view, even though, as I don't know, I don't remember a June being this hot. I just don't remember a June being as hot as it is right now because of that high that's been sitting on top of us. And that's been heating the sea surface temperature. We were out in the boat. We ran 150 miles in the boat this past weekend. And, man, at one point I looked at the temperature gauge on the electronics of my boat, and the water temperature was 90 degrees. 90 degrees.
Wow.
When you think about the hurricane season, what are you thinking about?
It certainly has all the right ingredients there. I mean, as it seems like it has every year here recently. And especially given what we do for a living, I mean, it's never lost on me that the likelihood is that I'm going to wake up one morning in August or September and whatever is transpiring somewhere along the Gulf Coast or the East Coast is going to take up a lot of time in my life for the next 5 years to come after that. I mean, it's, and so disasters are obviously opportunity for someone in my line of work. But, I was very intimately involved with Hurricane Katrina recovery. And that was the first time I had ever seen, anything like that, obviously, in my life. And then in all the years that followed, dealing with the big tornado outbreak in 2011 and the Yazoo City tornado in 2010 and all the disasters, the subsequent tropical disasters that hit Mississippi, I started to really understand the disaster world. But since I left the business council and went into private business, just the quantity of disasters that I've worked in, all of the various disasters in various places, it's easy for us to take notice of what we're seeing on the Weather Channel when it's not coming towards us, but we forget how quickly we forget that at any given time someone is going through their Hurricane Katrina. They're dealing with that. Big communities that just get absolutely wiped out, and inland areas that have these incredible flash floods. I mean, what happened in North Carolina with Hurricane Helene last year was on a scale that I think if people had seen it with their own eyes, very much like Katrina. People say you can't watch the news and understand what really happened here. When you see it with your own eyes, you can take it all in. That's exactly the way it was in North Carolina. And so this is such a huge reality of life for us in modern times. And chances are, and I hate to end this on a bad note, but chances are, our next big one is coming to the Mississippi Gulf Coast. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we've been very, very fortunate for 20 years to have had relatively minor events compared to something like a Hurricane Katrina. But I mean, you think about it, Mississippi Gulf Coast was destroyed in 1947, and then again in 1969, and then big hurricanes in the 1980s, and then Hurricane Katrina in 2005. It's 2025. So we're due for our next big one very soon.
Yeah, I think, Zeta was a good test of some infrastructure. I mean, obviously it was a bigger wind event than we expected, about 8 foot roughly of storm surge. It was a good test. And so when I talked to local officials and others, especially like Mississippi Power Company, for example, and Coast Electric, it was more than a test for them. It was a major hit. But the fact is, it will be very interesting to see how all that plays out. Our bridges are better. Our below the streets infrastructure in the places where it needed to be rebuilt, like you mentioned, some work still going on. A lot of casinos are land based now. Some chose not to. Be interesting to see how that works. But and the other thing is, which I think is something you always have to think about, is that, do casinos rebuild if they get destroyed again, and how, what does that look like, and what impact will that have on insurance? What does that look like? And all these things are going to get tested. All the assumptions, all those things we took for granted after Hurricane Katrina, because it almost didn't happen after Hurricane Katrina, man. We had so much work to do to obviously the legislation that allows land-based gaming, but there was just a lot of work that we did to manage the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, to show people there was even a there that they could reinvest in. I mean, even the Sun Herald changed hands in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and they sent the team in to spend time with me and talk about our plans and hear what the recovery effort was all about, because they had a chance to not include the Sun Herald in the purchase. They could have gone in a different direction. Now I wish they hadn't, because, we would have landed in a different place. Sadly, the Sun Herald is just a shell of itself today because of all that. But crazy challenges in our future. And I pray that the infrastructure is way stronger. We know that it is than when Hurricane Katrina hit, and that maybe our resilience, our ability to bounce back will be greater. That's a fact. I think that will definitely happen. We will bounce back bigger, than we did before. But there's some big tests on the horizon, aren't there?
There are. I mean, recovery now looks so much like the Katrina model, because it really is built on mitigation, sustainability, and resiliency. And that's at the very heart of what we do in all these communities. And, to go back to our earlier conversation, sometimes the federal recovery infrastructure is not always prepared to keep up with that. You've got a fundamental issue when something gets destroyed because it's not designed well enough, and the only funding that the government wants to make available is funds to put it back exactly like it was, rather than turn it into what it needs to be. So those are the kind of challenges that all these communities face.
Say we will see that change. There's no doubt in my mind that there'll be more focus on resiliency and the infrastructure requirements of whatever results from this FEMA analysis. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Ashley Edwards. We're going to talk about the global scenarios that we're dealing with right now, and also AI adoption in Mississippi. We'll see you right after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. We're visiting with my friend Ashley Edwards. I hope you just enjoy that we just kind of going through some of the headlines and just chatting and catching up. And I hope you see value in this conversation. I had the opportunity to have Dr. Colin Napier on the show last week. He's head of the Mississippi Artificial Intelligence Network at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, and he's been working very closely with the governor. They've announced a Mississippi AI Talent Accelerator program. They also now announced a partnership with NVIDIA, and really, in terms of what they're doing educationally to connect with state universities, even some private universities, to really embrace AI and training models around AI to help prepare the workforce. We're the first in the nation to do it the way that we're doing it. It's good to see because I think, as I said on that show, this stuff's happening extremely quickly. And a lot of jobs are going to go away in a relatively short period of time. And they're going to be replaced with other jobs that are high-tech jobs like we're seeing at the data centers and whatever. But this is one of the reasons, Ashley, I've been pushing hard for a regional economic development alliance so that we can move faster to diversify our economy, because the AI is going to have a big impact. And the reality is we've got to find growth in new business, new advanced manufacturing, and so on. But it's good to see the state embracing it, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it is arguably the single most important thing for our collective future. I mean, when I talk about this, and I do talk about AI a lot, it's something personally that I've started to look into. What are some of the sort of the best in class AI training programs to really understand the prompt engineering side, because it's become such an integral part of our business day to day. I feel like I need to go and learn more about it. And I tell my kids all the time, AI skills are going to be some of the most important skills in the economy that you're going into. And I think the thing that's going to take everybody by surprise, if it hasn't already, frankly, is going to be the pace of the change and adoption of all this new that's going to occur. Never in human history, even in the great industrial revolutions that we look back on, have things changed as much as fast as what the next decade of our existence is going to look like. And when we wake up in 2035, 10 years from now, we are going to live in a world that is so inconceivably different. We literally cannot comprehend today how different the 2035 world is going to be from the 2025 world, and it's going to create a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities. Uh, Workforce is going to be fundamentally different than it is today. The job market is going to be fundamentally different. The economy is going to be fundamentally different. So, Ricky, I think to your point, the skills that are going to be necessary for economic development, for regions that are trying to compete and keep up, for states like what you see with what Mississippi's doing, is going to be speed. It's going to be the ability to adapt at pace to the changes that are occurring, and those that don't adapt are going to be left behind, and it's going to create an even further division between the haves and the have-nots. And so I think it's very strategic and very smart that Mississippi is putting the emphasis on this that it is, because I think Mississippi sees it like everybody else, in the sense that most folks are on a relatively even playing field with this new technology that's coming in, and this is a place where we can punch above our weight if we're fast and if we're strategic. So I'm very excited.
I went through some estimates on net job loss in that show I did with Collins. Very, very significant. Listen, we only have 2 minutes. We'll have to have you back and we can talk about international affairs. But isn't it amazing what's happening in the Middle East right now, man? I mean, we're headed to a whole new era.
Well, it's absolutely incredible, and my wife laughs about it because I told her like 24, 48 hours before the first Israeli attack happened, like something is about to go down. I follow a lot of the public intelligence briefings and some of the think tank groups that put out international intelligence briefings. I've always been very just interested in that stuff, almost like a little nerdy hobby. And with all of the moves that you could see happening from a logistics standpoint, with the evacuations of military bases and of ambassadors' residences and of various State Department buildings in the Middle East, it was very clear something was about to jump off. And this is very significant, Ricky. I mean, this is the kind of thing that will change history one way or the other. It's still yet to be determined all of the ways that's going to go down, but we're going to have a fundamentally different Middle East as a result of what's happened over the last 12 or 13 days.
I hope that it is peaceful. I mean, you can have an Iran that feels the way they do about us, but as long as they don't have a nuclear weapon, as long as we can have peace, and you see all these other Middle Eastern companies coming together, and Saudi Arabia potentially embracing the Abraham Accord and all the stuff that's happening. My gosh, man, the proxies all getting beat to hell and back. Whew, Be interesting. I can't wait to have you back, and we'll spend the whole show and just talk about the international situation. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with you, my friend.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to be back with you, and wish all you listeners a great afternoon.
You bet. Have a great one. We'll see you tomorrow.